This channel is for women who are doing fine, but feel quietly lost. The quiet discomfort of being fine. I want to begin with something uncomfortable. What if nothing is wrong with my life? And that's exactly the problem. I am not in crisis. I am not being betrayed. I am not drowning in debt. I am not curled up on the bathroom floor wondering how I got here. I am functioning. I am respected. I am responsible. If someone asked about me, they would say, "She's doing well." And yet, there are nights when I sit on the edge of my bed, the house quiet, the dishwasher humming in the background, and I feel something I don't know how to name. It isn't sadness. It isn't anger. It isn't even dissatisfaction. It's absence, an absence of spark, an absence of urgency, an absence of aliveness. I move through my days with precision. I wake up before the alarm most mornings. I pour my coffee into the same mug. I answer emails. I attend meetings. I remember to send the birthday card. I make the appointment. I handle the logistics. I carry the emotional weight without announcing it. I am the steady one. I have become very good at being steady, somewhere between building a career, maintaining relationships, managing a household, and learning how to survive disappointment without dramatizing it. I mastered composure. I learned how to absorb stress without cracking. I learned how to keep my voice even. I learned how to not need too much. And no one applauds that, but everyone depends on it. There is a particular loneliness in being the woman who is fine. No one checks on the woman who is fine. No one worries about the woman who is fine. And no one asks if the woman who is fine feels invisible inside her own competence, because fine is functional. Fine is safe. Fine does not scare people, but fine can suffocate me slowly. I don't remember when I stopped feeling curious about my own life. I don't remember when my days became sequences instead of experiences. I don't remember when I started choosing stability over desire every single time. What I do remember is this. I used to feel something stronger than this. I used to feel anticipation. I used to feel hunger for what might happen. I used to feel like the future was expanding instead of narrowing. Now the future feels organized, predictable, responsible, managed. And that predictability is not tragic. It's earned. I worked for it. I created it. I built this life carefully, intelligently, intentionally, which is why admitting that I feel quietly disconnected inside it feels almost ungrateful. I have everything I once said I wanted. So why does it feel like I am watching my own life from a polite distance? There is a version of me that the world sees. She is competent. She is emotionally regulated. She does not overshare. She does not unravel publicly. She handles things. She figures it out. She shows up. Then there is the version of me that sits in silence at night and wonders, is this it? Not in a dramatic way, not in a reckless way, just in a whisper. Is this the full expression of who I am? Or did I quietly trade parts of myself for stability? There is a cultural script I inherited without noticing. Be capable, be strong, be grateful. Don't complain if your life looks good on paper. Don't create problems where there are none. And don't dismantle what works. So I didn't. I adjusted. I adapted. I optimized. And somewhere along the way, I became efficient at living, but distant from myself. This is the quiet middle. It's not the chaos of youth. It's not the crisis of collapse. It's the plateau, the place where nothing is falling apart, but nothing feels deeply alive either. And it is terrifying in a subtle way, because I could stay here indefinitely. No one would intervene. No one would question it. No one would demand more from me. I could keep functioning, keep maintaining, keep being the reliable one. And 20 years from now, I might wake up and realize I lived responsibly, but not vividly. That thought unsettles me more than failure ever could. Because failure is visible, drift is silent. Drift happens in small concessions. I'll try that later, and I'll revisit that dream when things calm down. I don't need that anymore. That was for a younger version of me. Drift sounds mature. Drift sounds practical. But drift slowly erodes identity. I don't feel broken. I don't feel depressed. I feel underexpressed. There are parts of me that haven't been invited into my life in years. The creative part, the daring part, the woman who once surprised herself. When was the last time I did something that made my heart beat faster, for a reason other than stress? When was the last time I walked into a room and felt electric instead of prepared? When was the last time I made a decision because it expanded me, not because it stabilized everyone else? These questions are not accusations. They are awakenings. And if they make something inside me shift uncomfortably, that discomfort is not a flaw. It is a signal that fine is no longer enough. If any of this feels familiar, if I recognize myself in this quiet plateau, then I am exactly where I need to be for this conversation. Because the most dangerous place is not the bottom. It is the comfortable middle. If this resonates with me, if I have been carrying this unspoken restlessness quietly, subscribe to this channel, support it, stay here, not because I need motivation, but because I need language for what I've been feeling. And we are going to keep having conversations that most people are too busy pretending they don't need. I am not unraveling, but I am no longer willing to drift. And that is where everything begins. The most dangerous advice: just accept yourself. There is a sentence people offer with such tenderness that it almost feels cruel to question it. Just accept yourself. It sounds compassionate, mature, healed. It sounds like something I am supposed to outgrow into, like tight jeans I wore in my 20s. By now, I should be above striving, above reinvention, above wanting more. At this stage of my life, I am told I should settle into myself, make peace with my edges, stop trying so hard, stop reinventing, stop pushing. And there is truth in acceptance. I have no desire to punish myself. I have no interest in becoming my own critic again. I have done enough of that in earlier decades, analyzing my body, my choices, my timing, my mistakes. But somewhere along the way, the language of acceptance began to blur with the language of resignation. And that distinction matters. Acceptance says, I see myself clearly without cruelty. Resignation says, this is as good as it gets. And they sound similar. They feel very different. When I hear just accept yourself, I sometimes hear something unspoken beneath it. Stop changing. Stop wanting. Stop evolving. You've done enough. Be grateful. Be content. But what if the restlessness inside me is not ingratitude? What if it is information? I think about the version of me who built my current life. She was sharp, determined. She tolerated discomfort because she believed it was temporary. She stayed up late studying. She took professional risks. She ended relationships that felt misaligned. She moved cities when she needed to. She did not tell herself to simply accept circumstances that felt too small. She would not recognize the idea that growth should stop just because my life looks stable now. Somewhere in adulthood, particularly for women, there is an invisible transition. Ambition is applauded when it builds something tangible, a career, a family, a reputation. But once those structures are in place, ambition becomes suspicious. Reinvention becomes unnecessary. Desire becomes indulgent. At 28, reinvention is exciting. At 48, reinvention is disruptive. I can feel that cultural pressure. It hums quietly in conversations. When someone says, "You're in a good place, why rock the boat?" what they mean is, don't disturb what works. Don't complicate things. Don't chase something undefined. And yet there is something deeply unsettling about staying the same on purpose. I am not the same woman I was 5 years ago. My body has changed. My priorities have shifted. My tolerance has narrowed in some places and widened in others. My emotional landscape is more nuanced. I notice subtleties I once ignored. And I care less about being impressive. I care more about being aligned. If I freeze myself in an identity that once fit, I am no longer practicing acceptance. I am practicing self-abandonment. There is a difference between embracing who I am and clinging to who I was. Sometimes, just accept yourself is offered as protection from shame. But shame is not the only force that pushes me to change. Sometimes clarity does. Sometimes boredom does. Sometimes quiet dissatisfaction does. When I say I want more, I am not saying my life is inadequate. I am saying I am not finished becoming. That feels different. I have noticed something subtle. When I try to silence my desire for growth under the banner of acceptance, it doesn't disappear. It hardens. It becomes irritation. It becomes impatience. It becomes subtle resentment, not toward anyone else, but toward myself, because I know when I am playing small, and I know when I am pretending I don't. Self-compassion is powerful. It allows me to forgive past decisions. It allows me to hold my mistakes without self-hatred. It allows me to understand the context of my choices. But self-compassion was never meant to be a sedative. It was meant to stabilize me enough to move forward. There is also a quieter truth. Sometimes the advice to accept myself is easier for other people than it is for me. If I stay the same, I am predictable. If I stay the same, I do not require adjustment from others. If I stay the same, I do not disrupt established roles. When I grow, relationships recalibrate. When I change, expectations shift. When I become more direct, someone may feel challenged. When I become more ambitious, someone may feel left behind. When I become more honest, someone may feel exposed. Growth has consequences. Acceptance, in its laziest form, protects comfort, not necessarily truth. There is also fear wrapped inside this advice. Fear that if I start evolving again, I will discover things I cannot ignore. What if I realize I want different conversations, different work, different rhythms? What if I realize I have outgrown certain dynamics? What if I realize I am more capable than I have allowed myself to be? It is safer to say I accept myself. It is riskier to say I am ready to evolve. Evolution implies effort. Effort implies disruption. Disruption implies uncertainty. But stagnation has its own cost. It is subtle at first. It looks like fatigue. It sounds like, I guess this is just adulthood. It feels like emotional flatness. Over time, one calcifies into identity. I become the woman who once had ideas, the woman who once experimented, the woman who once surprised herself. I do not want to be a museum of my former bravery. Acceptance, for me, now means something different. It means I accept that I am a living organism. I accept that my desires will shift. I accept that growth may look awkward at this age. I accept that reinvention will not come with applause. I accept that I am allowed to want more depth, more honesty, more alignment, without framing it as dissatisfaction with what I have. I also accept that change does not have to be dramatic. It can be precise. It can be intentional. It can begin internally, long before it becomes visible externally. There's nothing immature about wanting to expand. There's nothing ungrateful about wanting to refine. There is nothing unstable about recognizing that the woman I was is not the woman I am becoming. Just accept yourself becomes dangerous when it implies permanence. I am not permanent. I am in motion, even when I look still. If I am honest, the women I admire most are not the ones who stopped changing. They are the ones who kept adjusting with integrity. They let their lives reflect who they were becoming, not who they had been expected to remain. Acceptance is not the end of growth. It is the foundation for honest growth. I accept where I am, and from that clarity, I choose where I am going. That is not rebellion. It is responsibility. I am not rejecting myself. I am refusing to fossilize. Nobody is coming to save me, and that's not tragic. There was a time when I believed relief would arrive in the form of a person, and not dramatically, not like a movie, but subtly. I believed that eventually someone would step into my life and see what I could not see. They would name what I could not name. They would unlock something in me simply by loving me well enough, understanding me deeply enough, choosing me consistently enough. And for a while, I built my hope around that possibility. If this relationship improves, I will feel more alive. If my partner becomes more attentive, I will soften. If someone finally understands me without explanation, I will finally exhale. But here's the quiet truth I had to face. No one can rescue me from an internal distance I created. No one can hand me clarity if I refuse to ask myself hard questions. No one can restore my spark if I have quietly abandoned the parts of me that generate it. I used to think rescue meant weakness, and that admitting I wanted to be saved made me fragile. Now I see it differently. Wanting rescue is human. It is a longing to be seen so clearly that someone else carries the weight for a while. But there is a difference between being supported and being saved. Support strengthens me. Rescue replaces me. And somewhere along the way, I realized I had been waiting for a replacement, waiting for the right conversation, waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for the right season, waiting for the chaos to calm down so I could begin again. The truth is, my life is not chaotic. It is structured, predictable, responsible. There is no dramatic storm to blame for my stagnation, which means there is no dramatic rescue coming either. That realization did not crush me. It clarified me. Because if no one is coming to save me, then I am no longer obligated to wait. There is something strangely empowering about releasing the fantasy of arrival. The fantasy that someday someone will knock on the door of my life and say, "Now it starts." That someone will notice I am tired before I say it. That someone will sense my restlessness and redesign my world for me. I am the one who senses it. I am the one who feels it. I am the one who has to respond to it. I also had to confront something uncomfortable. Sometimes I used productivity as a distraction from dissatisfaction. I filled my calendar. I organized everything. I became indispensable. Being needed felt like purpose. Being busy felt like progress. But busyness can be a very elegant form of avoidance. If I am always managing, always responding, always handling, I do not have to sit still long enough to ask whether I am fulfilled. I do not have to ask whether the life I built is still aligned with the woman I am becoming. It is easier to maintain than to transform, and rescue fantasies protect maintenance. I remember thinking, when the kids get older, I'll revisit myself. When the promotion comes through, I'll finally relax into who I am. When the house is paid off, when the schedule is lighter, when the relationship is smoother, when things settle down. But life does not settle into a perfect opening. It keeps moving. Responsibilities shift shape, but never disappear. If I attach my aliveness to a future clearing in the schedule, I will be waiting forever. No one is coming to hand me permission. And that is not tragic. It is liberating. because permission given by someone else can be revoked. Then permission claimed by me cannot. I also had to recognize the subtle ways I avoided ownership by placing emotional responsibility outside myself. If I felt unseen, I blamed someone else's inattentiveness. If I felt understimulated, I blamed my job's limitations. If I felt stagnant, I blamed timing. There were external factors, yes. Life is complex. But beneath those circumstances was something quieter. I had stopped advocating for my own expansion. It is easier to wait for someone else to notice my potential than to claim it out loud. It is easier to hope someone else will initiate change than to initiate it myself and risk discomfort. There is grief in realizing I am responsible for the next chapter. Grief because it means there is no dramatic pivot orchestrated by fate, no sudden intervention, no heroic rescue. But there is also relief. Relief in knowing I do not have to wait for approval. Relief in knowing I do not have to become smaller to maintain harmony. Relief in knowing that if I want my life to feel different, I have agency. Agency does not mean control over everything. It means ownership of my response. I cannot control how others evolve. I cannot control whether someone sees me perfectly. I cannot control timing in every area of life. But I can control whether I choose growth over comfort. I can control whether I keep postponing my own becoming. There is something humbling about realizing no one is coming. It strips away fantasy. It removes the illusion that someone else holds the key to my transformation. It also demands maturity. Maturity is not about suppressing desire. It is about taking responsibility for it. If I want deeper connection, and I have to initiate honest conversations. If I want creative fulfillment, I have to make space for it. If I want vitality, I have to move my body, feed it intentionally, protect my energy. No one can want that for me more than I want it for myself. When I release the idea of rescue, I stop negotiating with invisible saviors. I stop telling myself that the next relationship will fix what I have not examined. I stop believing that external upgrades automatically produce internal alignment. I also become more appreciative of real support when it does appear. Support is different from salvation. Support walks beside me. It does not carry me, and I do not need to be carried. There is strength in knowing I can redesign aspects of my life without burning everything down. I can recalibrate quietly. I can shift habits. I can refine boundaries. And I can evolve in ways that do not require drama. Waiting is passive. Ownership is active. I am not waiting anymore. That does not mean I am rushing. It means I am choosing. Choosing to examine where I feel flat. Choosing to identify where I have been coasting. Choosing to admit where I have outgrown my own patterns. No one is coming to save me from a life I built. And I do not need saving. I need intention. I need honesty. I need courage to look at my reflection and ask, what do I want now? Not what did I want 10 years ago? Not what looks impressive. Not what keeps everything stable. What do I want now? That question is not selfish. It is responsible. Because if I refuse to answer it, resentment eventually answers for me. No one is coming. So I will. The concept of the second self. I used to believe identity was something fixed, and something I discovered in my 20s and then carried, mostly unchanged, into the rest of my life. I thought authenticity meant consistency. If I changed too much, wasn't I being fake? If I stepped into a different tone, a different posture, a different rhythm, wasn't I performing? Then I started paying attention to how other people move through the world. Years ago, I watched an interview with a performer named Elena Cruz. She described the moment just before she walked on stage in Las Vegas. She said that when the lights went down and the music started, she was not the same woman who had eaten takeout in sweatpants 2 hours earlier. On stage, she was sharper, bolder, unapologetic. Her eye contact was deliberate. Her movements were precise. She didn't shrink. She expanded. What struck me wasn't the glamour. It was the intention. She wasn't lying about who she was. She was amplifying a part of herself that everyday life didn't require. And I wondered, what parts of me have I been leaving backstage? The idea unsettled me at first. I have spent years trying to be authentic, to avoid pretense, to resist the pressure to perform femininity, competence, or likability in exaggerated ways. The last thing I wanted was to become artificial, but I began to understand something deeper. The second self is not deception. It is deliberate embodiment. There is the version of me shaped by habit, expectation, and repetition. The woman who responds automatically. The woman who deflects compliments. The woman who softens her voice in meetings to avoid sounding intimidating. The woman who waits to be invited into conversations instead of entering them. That version is real. But she is not the whole story. There is also a version of me that exists in flashes. She appears when I am alone on a long walk and my thoughts feel expansive. She appears when I am deeply engaged in a conversation that matters. She appears when I allow myself to speak without rehearsing every sentence first. She is not louder. She is clearer. For years, I treated that clarity as situational, something that happened when circumstances aligned perfectly. I didn't realize I could cultivate her on purpose. The second self is not about becoming someone else. It is about choosing which parts of myself to strengthen. When I think about identity this way, it becomes less mystical and more practical. The brain is adaptive. Neural pathways deepen through repetition. The way I hold my shoulders, the way I respond to conflict, and the way I make decisions. These are patterns, and patterns can be reshaped. If I consistently choose to speak directly, instead of circling my point, I become someone who communicates clearly. If I consistently choose to move my body in the morning instead of scrolling my phone, I become someone who prioritizes vitality. If I consistently choose to hold eye contact instead of glancing down, I become someone who signals confidence. This is not magic. It is rehearsal. The second self is built through small acts of embodiment. I remember a moment in Santa Monica when I was sitting alone with a notebook, trying to articulate what felt off in my life. I wrote down a simple question. If I met the most evolved version of myself 5 years from now, what would intimidate me about her? The answers came quickly. She would not apologize unnecessarily. She would not over-explain her decisions. She would protect her mornings. She would choose conversations that nourish instead of drain. She would move through rooms without shrinking. None of these traits felt impossible, but they felt foreign because I had not practiced them consistently. The second self, I realized, is not created through dramatic reinvention. She is assembled through daily alignment. I had to separate this idea from performance. Performance seeks validation. Embodiment seeks integrity. If I walk into a meeting and deliberately straighten my posture, I am not pretending to be confident. I am practicing the physical language of confidence until it becomes natural. If I decline an invitation that feels obligatory rather than energizing, I am not becoming selfish, and I am practicing discernment. There is a subtle but powerful shift that happens when I stop waiting to feel different before acting different. For years, I believed that feelings had to lead. I would tell myself, when I feel ready, I will speak up. When I feel confident, I will pursue that idea. When I feel clear, I will make that change. But feelings are unreliable leaders. They fluctuate with sleep, hormones, stress, and external feedback. Action, on the other hand, creates evidence. When I act in alignment with the woman I want to become, I collect proof. Proof that I can tolerate discomfort. Proof that I can survive disapproval. Proof that I can handle expansion. And slowly, identity adjusts to match behavior. The second self is not a fantasy version of me who never doubts herself. She still doubts. She still hesitates. The difference is that she moves anyway. There is something deeply empowering about recognizing that I am not trapped in the habits of my past. The woman who automatically defers, who minimizes, who hesitates. She was shaped by context. She developed in environments that required caution or accommodation. But I am no longer in those environments. Why am I still behaving as if I am? This question is not an accusation. It is an invitation. If I am no longer a young woman seeking approval, why am I still calibrating my voice to make others comfortable? If I have decades of experience, why do I still second-guess my instincts? If I have survived disappointment, loss, reinvention, why do I treat myself as fragile? The second self does not ignore history. She integrates it. She recognizes that the skills that once kept me safe may no longer be necessary. She honors the past without being governed by it. Creating her is not about erasing who I have been. It is about updating who I am. There is discipline involved in this process, but it is not harsh. It is attentive. It requires me to notice when I default to old patterns, to pause, to ask, is this aligned with who I am becoming? Sometimes the answer will be no, and in that moment, I have a choice. I can continue on autopilot, or I can adjust. Adjustment does not require drama. It requires awareness. Over time, these adjustments accumulate. The way I stand, the way I schedule my week, the way I speak about myself, the boundaries I set, the risks I take. Eventually, the second self stops feeling second. She becomes integrated. And I do not wake up one morning transformed. There is no cinematic turning point. Instead, there is a gradual familiarity. I begin to recognize myself in my own courage. I begin to trust my own voice. I begin to feel less like I am managing an identity and more like I am inhabiting one. The woman I am becoming is not louder than I am. She is not flashier. She is not designed to impress anyone. She is simply more aligned. And alignment, at this stage of my life, feels far more powerful than reinvention for the sake of novelty. I do not need to become someone else. I need to practice being all of who I already am. Designing the woman I want to become. Once I understood that I could practice becoming a more aligned version of myself, a new question surfaced, one that felt both thrilling and unnerving. Who, exactly, am I becoming? It is easy to say I want to grow. It is easy to say I want to feel more alive, more present, more honest. But growth without direction becomes noise. Movement without clarity becomes exhaustion. If I am going to step into a more intentional version of myself, I need detail. Vague transformation is seductive. Specific transformation is demanding. So I sat down one Sunday morning, before the world got loud, and I asked myself questions I had avoided for years. How does the woman I want to become spend her mornings? Does she wake up already bracing for the day? Or does she rise slowly, deliberately, guarding the first 30 minutes as sacred? Does she check her phone immediately? Or does she sit with her thoughts, maybe a cup of coffee warming her hands, before letting the outside world in? And that small detail matters more than I once realized. The first moments of my day set the tone for everything that follows. If I want to become a woman who feels grounded, I cannot begin every morning in reaction mode. Then I asked, what does her calendar look like? Is it packed with obligations she resents? Or does it reflect discernment? Does she say yes because she is afraid of disappointing people, or because the invitation genuinely aligns with her energy? I began to see how my calendar quietly revealed my boundaries. If I wanted to design a different version of myself, I needed to examine what I was agreeing to, not dramatically, just honestly. Next, I looked at my physical environment, my kitchen, my bedroom, my closet. The woman I am becoming does not live in chaos disguised as busyness. She curates her space intentionally and not perfectly. I am not chasing aesthetic minimalism, but consciously. Her kitchen contains food that nourishes her body instead of numbing her emotions. Her bedroom is a place of rest, not a second office filled with laundry piles and unopened mail. I stood in front of my closet one afternoon and realized how much of my wardrobe was designed to disappear. Neutral tones, safe silhouettes, clothes that communicated competence but not presence. The woman I am becoming does not dress to hide. She dresses to reflect how she feels inside, structured when she wants clarity, soft when she wants ease, bold when she wants expansion. This is not about vanity. It is about embodiment. The way I present myself influences the way I inhabit my body. The way I inhabit my body influences the way I move through rooms. And then I asked a harder question. Who does she spend time with? The answer was uncomfortable. She spends time with people who challenge her thinking, people who ask real questions, people who are not threatened by her growth. She limits time with those who subtly reinforce her smaller identity. This does not mean abandoning relationships recklessly. It means adjusting proximity. It means recognizing that my nervous system responds differently, depending on who I am around. If I want to become braver, I need to be near courage. If I want to become calmer, I need to be near steadiness. I also examined how she moves her body, not from punishment, not from obsession, but from respect. The woman I am becoming understands that vitality is not accidental. She walks regularly, not because she is chasing a number on a scale, but because movement clears mental fog. She lifts weights because strength translates into confidence. She stretches because flexibility in the body softens rigidity in the mind. Her physicality mirrors her emotional life, strong, adaptable, deliberate. I wrote another exercise in my notebook that day, sitting near the ocean air in Santa Monica, letting the sound of waves steady my thoughts. I imagined myself at 82. I imagined someone standing at a podium speaking about my life. What would I want them to say? Not about my job title, not about how many tasks I completed, but about how I lived. Did I take risks aligned with my values? Did I speak honestly when it mattered? Did I remain curious past midlife? Did I allow myself joy without apology? This exercise startled me, and because the woman being described in that imaginary eulogy was more courageous than the one I was currently embodying. She had traveled alone at least once without over-planning. She had taken a class just because she was curious. She had learned something new in her 50s that had nothing to do with productivity. She had written. She had created. She had allowed herself to be seen in ways that were uncomfortable, but honest. Designing the woman I want to become is not about fantasy. It is about alignment between my daily actions and my long-term integrity. I also asked myself a practical question. What would someone pay $10 for me to do well? This question strips away ego. It forces specificity. Am I a good listener? Do I give clear advice? Do I cook meals that comfort people? Do I organize chaos efficiently? And do I articulate ideas in ways that resonate? The woman I am becoming knows her strengths and uses them intentionally, She does not dismiss them as accidental. She does not hide them out of modesty. She also knows her limits. Design requires subtraction as much as addition. What does she no longer tolerate? Chronic disrespect, overcommitment, digital noise that fragments her attention, conversations that revolve around comparison instead of substance. She curates not only her physical environment, but her informational diet. She is selective about what she consumes online. She protects her focus. She understands that attention is a currency. The more specific I became, the more real she felt. She was not a glamorous alter ego. She did not require reinvention of my entire life. She required refinement, a recalibration of choices. And the truth is, designing this woman required confronting the gap between intention and habit. It revealed how often I default to convenience, how often I tell myself later instead of now, how often I underestimate my own capacity for discipline. But clarity is sobering in a productive way. When I can see her clearly, how she moves, what she values, how she spends her time, it becomes harder to pretend I do not know what adjustments are necessary. This is not about chasing perfection. The woman I am becoming still has flaws. She still feels tired. She still doubts herself sometimes. But she does not drift. She chooses. She chooses how she begins her mornings. She chooses which conversations she entertains. She chooses how she nourishes her body. She chooses how she presents herself to the world. Designing her did not make me anxious. One, it made me accountable, because once I defined her, I could no longer claim confusion. I knew what alignment looked like, and now the only question that remains is whether I am willing to live like it. Behavior. Before belief. For most of my adult life, I waited to feel different before I acted different. I told myself that once I felt confident, I would speak more directly. Once I felt motivated, I would take better care of my body. Once I felt inspired, I would protect my time more fiercely. I treated belief as the prerequisite for behavior, as if clarity had to arrive fully formed before I was allowed to move. But belief is fragile when it has no evidence. And evidence is created through behavior. This realization did not come to me in a dramatic breakthrough. It came quietly, in the repetition of small choices. When I began to notice that the days I felt most aligned were not the days when I woke up inspired. They were the days when I did something aligned before my mood had a chance to negotiate. There is something deeply humbling about acting before I feel ready. It exposes how much I have relied on emotion as a compass. Emotions matter. They signal needs. They reflect internal states, but they are not always reliable indicators of long-term direction. If I only move when I feel like it, I will remain loyal to my current comfort level. The woman I designed in my notebook does not wait for a surge of motivation to begin her morning differently. She stands up when the alarm rings. She stretches her body before she stretches her attention toward the world. She moves because she decided she values vitality, not because she woke up craving it. At first, this felt mechanical, almost inauthentic. There is a cultural narrative that insists real change should feel intuitive, that if something is meant for me, it will flow effortlessly. But discipline rarely feels intuitive at the beginning. It feels deliberate, slightly uncomfortable, even awkward. I remember one morning when I almost reached for my phone out of habit. It was automatic. My hand moved before I consciously decided. I paused. That pause was small, but significant. In that moment, I was choosing between the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. I put the phone down. I stood up instead. That action did not transform me. It did not flood me with confidence. But it planted a marker. It told my brain, this is the direction we are moving now. Neuroscience is not mystical. The brain strengthens the pathways it uses most. Now, if I consistently respond to discomfort with avoidance, avoidance becomes efficient. If I consistently respond to discomfort with aligned action, resilience becomes efficient. Behavior teaches the brain what to expect. There is also something deeply practical about acting first. When I behave as if I value myself, my internal narrative slowly adjusts to support that behavior. If I prepare thoughtfully for a meeting and speak clearly, even when my voice trembles slightly, I gather data. The data says, I survived. I contributed. I was not rejected. Over time, that data builds a foundation for belief. If I choose nourishing food repeatedly, not from punishment but from intention, my body responds. Energy stabilizes. Inflammation reduces. Sleep improves. Those physical shifts reinforce the identity of someone who cares for herself, and a belief grows in response to evidence. I had to stop romanticizing confidence as a feeling. Confidence is often a byproduct. It follows repeated exposure to situations that once felt intimidating. When I think about Elena Cruz stepping on stage in Las Vegas, I do not imagine she felt fearless every night. I imagine she rehearsed until the movements felt natural. The boldness was practiced. The precision was practiced. The eye contact was practiced. Practice precedes comfort. There is a psychological principle known as embodied cognition, the idea that the body influences the mind. The way I hold myself affects how I perceive myself. When I straighten my spine, slow my breathing, and make deliberate eye contact, my nervous system registers stability. When I move with purpose, my brain begins to interpret me as purposeful. This is not performance. It is alignment between physiology and intention. I have also learned that small, boring consistency is more transformative than dramatic bursts of effort. The woman I am becoming does not overhaul her entire life in a single week. She chooses 1 or 2 behaviors and repeats them relentlessly. 20 minutes of movement, 30 minutes of reading, a clear no when something drains her, a direct sentence instead of a softened one. These actions do not make headlines, but they create identity. There is loneliness in this process. When I shift behavior before belief catches up, I often feel isolated. Others may not understand the change. They may interpret my boundaries as distance. They may feel unsettled when I respond differently than I used to. Behavioral change disrupts relational equilibrium. And if I have always been the accommodating one, speaking directly may surprise people. If I have always overextended, declining invitations may create friction. In those moments, it is tempting to retreat back into familiar patterns, to wait until I feel more secure, to tell myself I will try again later. But belief does not arrive through retreat. It arrives through repetition. There is also discomfort in confronting how much I have underestimated myself. When I act before I feel ready and discover I can handle more than I assumed, it forces me to revise my self-concept. That revision can be destabilizing. It challenges the narrative that I am fragile or incapable. Sometimes I have used that narrative as protection. If I believe I cannot handle something, I do not have to risk trying. Acting first dismantles that excuse. I do not need to feel powerful to make a powerful decision. I do not need to feel disciplined to execute a disciplined action. I do not need to feel courageous to initiate a difficult conversation. I initiate. Then courage builds in the aftermath. There will be days when I revert, days when I scroll instead of move, days when I soften my words instead of speaking plainly. This is not failure. It is part of the process of rewiring. But I cannot let occasional inconsistency justify permanent stagnation. The question that guides me now is simple. If I continue behaving this way for the next year, who will I become? That question removes emotion from the equation. It frames behavior as trajectory. If I continue defaulting to comfort, I will become more comfortable. If I continue choosing aligned discomfort, I will become more aligned. Behavior is directional. Belief is reflective. It reflects what I repeatedly demonstrate to myself. The woman I am becoming does not wait for certainty. She experiments. She tests new patterns. She tolerates the awkward phase where the behavior feels slightly unnatural. Eventually, the unnatural becomes familiar. The familiar becomes identity. I used to think belief was the engine and behavior the vehicle. Now I understand behavior is the engine. Belief catches up later, adjusting itself to match the evidence I provide. If I want to trust myself more, I have to act in ways that are trustworthy. If I want to see myself as capable, I have to behave in ways that require capability. The transformation is not dramatic. It is cumulative. One morning without the phone, one honest sentence, one protected boundary, one deliberate movement, and over time those moments stitch together into a new self-concept. And when belief finally shifts, it does not feel like magic. It feels earned. The pain of accountability. Accountability does not arrive as a motivational speech. It arrives as a quiet reckoning. I remember standing alone in a hotel room in Boston after a professional conference. The room was immaculate, neutral, impersonal. The city lights filtered through the window, soft and distant. I had just spent 2 days presenting competence, shaking hands, contributing ideas, smiling at the right moments. By all visible standards, I had done well. And yet, when I caught my reflection in the mirror above the dresser, something unsettled me. It wasn't my appearance. It wasn't fatigue. It was recognition. When I saw a woman who had mastered composure and avoided confrontation with herself, there is a particular kind of pain that comes when I realize no one forced my stagnation. No one actively suppressed my growth. No one stood in front of me and said, "You are not allowed to expand." I complied with comfort. That is harder to swallow than blame. It is easier to point to circumstances, timing, other people's limitations, cultural expectations. All of those factors exist, and they matter. But in that quiet Boston hotel room, none of them could absorb the full weight of my dissatisfaction. I had chosen convenience repeatedly. I had chosen predictability over possibility. I had chosen to soften my ambitions so that I would not disrupt equilibrium. Accountability stripped away the comforting narrative that I was simply responding to life, and it revealed that I was also shaping it. There is grief in that realization, grief for time spent hesitating, grief for opportunities I dismissed because they felt inconvenient, grief for the younger version of me who believed she would always be braver later. Accountability asks me to sit with those truths without self-pity and without self-hatred. That balance is delicate. If I lean too far into guilt, I become paralyzed. If I avoid guilt entirely, I repeat patterns. The pain lies in staying present with the truth long enough to learn from it. I thought about the moments I dimmed my voice in meetings, even when I knew my perspective mattered. I thought about the conversations I postponed because I feared conflict. I thought about the creative impulses I shelved because they were impractical. No one forbade those actions, and I forbade them for myself. That realization is sharp. It cuts through excuses. Accountability also forces me to confront how I have participated in my own dissatisfaction. It requires me to ask uncomfortable questions. Where have I tolerated less than I desire? Where have I overfunctioned to avoid vulnerability? Where have I blamed circumstances instead of adjusting my behavior? There is no applause for answering those questions honestly. There is only clarity. I also had to examine the roots of my avoidance. Some of my patterns did not originate in adulthood. They were formed much earlier. A tendency to anticipate others' needs, a reflex to keep the peace, a habit of minimizing my own discomfort so that the environment remained stable. These patterns once protected me. They were adaptive. Now, but adaptation can calcify into identity if I never reassess it. Accountability does not erase compassion for my past. It contextualizes it. It allows me to say, I understand why I developed these tendencies, and I can choose differently now. There is something profoundly maturing about that statement. It shifts the focus from fault to responsibility. Responsibility is forward-facing. Fault is backward-facing. When I stood in that Boston hotel room, I could have spiraled into regret. I could have replayed decisions and imagined alternate timelines. Instead, I let the discomfort sit in my chest. I let it tell me what it needed to tell me. It said, "You are capable of more honesty than this." That message was not cruel. It was demanding. Accountability is demanding because it requires consistency. It is not enough to acknowledge misalignment once. I have to adjust behavior repeatedly. There are days when I still default to old patterns, days when I avoid directness, days when I overcommit. The difference now is that I notice it, and noticing carries its own discomfort. Awareness makes avoidance less comfortable. That discomfort is productive if I let it be. There is also guilt embedded in accountability. Guilt for the ways my hesitation may have affected others. Times when my lack of clarity created confusion. Times when my silence allowed misunderstandings to persist. It would be easier to dismiss those moments as minor. But growth demands precision. It asks me to own not only what I did, but what I failed to do. I failed to advocate for myself. I failed to set clear boundaries. I failed to articulate needs. When these failures were not malicious, they were cautious. But cautious living can still produce consequences. Accountability requires that I accept those consequences without defensiveness. It also requires that I forgive myself enough to move forward. There is a subtle shift that happens when I stop narrating my life as something that happens to me and start acknowledging how I participate in it. I become less reactive, less resentful, more deliberate. The pain of accountability is not meant to humiliate me. It is meant to sharpen me. It clarifies where I have been inconsistent. It exposes the gap between my stated values and my enacted behaviors. If I say I value honesty but avoid difficult conversations, accountability highlights the contradiction. If I say I value growth but cling to routines that feel safe, yes, accountability reveals the discrepancy. This clarity is uncomfortable, but it is also empowering, because if I contributed to my stagnation, I can contribute to my expansion. That realization is not glamorous. It is grounded. In that Boston hotel room, I did not make a dramatic vow. I did not promise to transform overnight. I simply acknowledged the truth without cushioning it. I am responsible for the next version of my life. Not entirely. Life remains unpredictable, but substantially. That responsibility is heavy and liberating at the same time. Heavy because I can no longer hide behind circumstance. Liberating because I am not waiting for external permission to change. Accountability does not ask me to shame myself. It asks me to respect myself enough to be honest. When I respect myself, and I tell the truth about where I have fallen short, and then I adjust. The pain of accountability is not a sign that I am failing. It is a sign that I am paying attention. And paying attention, even when it stings, is the beginning of integrity. Faith, surrender, and letting go of control used to feel like competence to me. If I anticipated every outcome, managed every detail, planned every conversation in advance, I felt safe. I called it responsibility. I called it maturity. I told myself I was simply being prepared, but underneath that preparation was fear. Fear of being blindsided, fear of being disappointed, fear of looking foolish, fear of wanting something and not receiving it. Control became my way of negotiating with uncertainty. If I managed everything tightly enough, maybe life would reward me with predictability, and it didn't. Life continued to shift in ways I could not forecast. People changed, opportunities dissolved, timelines stretched, outcomes defied logic. No matter how carefully I planned, I could not eliminate uncertainty. I could only exhaust myself trying. I remember sitting alone one evening long after a day that had not gone according to plan. Nothing catastrophic had happened, but several small expectations had unraveled. A conversation I had anticipated did not bring clarity. An opportunity I hoped would materialize stalled. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the urge to fix, to strategize, to push harder. Instead of planning my next move, I did something different. I spoke out loud, not formally, not in rehearsed language, just plainly. I said, "I don't know what I'm doing right now. I don't know why this isn't unfolding the way I thought it would, but I am tired of trying to control every angle." There was no dramatic response, no sign, no immediate shift. But something in me softened. Faith, for me, did not begin as certainty. It began as exhaustion with control. I had been treating God like a supervisor I needed to impress. I prayed for outcomes. I requested specific results. I attached my sense of security to whether those results appeared on my timeline. What changed was not the act of prayer, but the posture. Instead of asking for guarantees, I began asking for guidance. Instead of demanding outcomes, I began offering honesty. I would sit quietly in the mornings and say, "I want this, but if it is not aligned for me, redirect me." That sentence felt risky. It meant I had to trust that redirection was protection, not punishment. Surrender is often misunderstood as passivity. It is not giving up. It is releasing the illusion that I can orchestrate every variable. There is physiological relief in surrender. When I stop gripping outcomes so tightly, my body responds. My breathing slows, my shoulders lower, my mind quiets. The constant scanning for what might go wrong eases. Control is loud. Trust is quieter. Trust does not mean I stop acting. It means I act without clinging. When I send an email now, I send it thoughtfully and release the outcome. When I pursue an opportunity, I prepare diligently and accept that it may not materialize. When a relationship shifts, I allow myself to feel the loss without immediately trying to engineer a fix. This shift required humility. It required me to admit that my perspective is limited, on that what I interpret as failure may actually be redirection. There were moments when something I deeply wanted did not unfold. At first, I interpreted it as rejection. Later, I saw that had it happened, it would have anchored me in a version of my life that no longer fit. Faith matures when I can look back and recognize protection disguised as disappointment. I also had to confront how much of my need for control was rooted in earlier experiences. There were times in my younger years when unpredictability felt unsafe. Control became my coping mechanism. If I could anticipate enough, I could avoid chaos. But I am not in those environments anymore. The habits remain, long after the threat has passed. Letting go of control, then, is not reckless. It is adaptive growth. It is saying, I no longer need this level of vigilance to survive. There is another dimension to surrender that surprised me. When I stopped micromanaging every detail of my life, I became more receptive to help. Control isolates. It tells me I must manage alone. That if I delegate or admit uncertainty, I am weak. Trust, on the other hand, opens space for collaboration. There have been moments when someone offered insight or assistance that I might have previously dismissed. In the past, I would have interpreted help as evidence that I was failing to handle things independently. Now I see it as part of a larger design. Sometimes guidance arrives through people. Faith does not require me to reject logic. It requires me to accept that I am not the sole architect. Gratitude also shifted my relationship with surrender. Instead of approaching God only when I needed something, and I began practicing acknowledgement. Thank you for this morning. Thank you for health that allows me to move. Thank you for clarity that comes slowly but steadily. Gratitude recalibrates perception. It reminds me that not everything is a problem to solve. Some things are simply gifts to notice. The more I practiced gratitude, the less frantic my requests became. I no longer approached faith as a transaction. I approached it as relationship. There is vulnerability in that relationship. It requires me to admit desire openly, to say, I want this, I care about this, I am attached to this, and then to release it. Release does not mean indifference. It means trust. Trust that if something exits my life, it is making space. Trust that if something delays, there is timing I cannot yet see. Trust that my worth is not measured by outcomes. And there are still days when I feel the old urge to grip tightly, when uncertainty triggers anxiety. In those moments, surrender is not automatic. It is chosen. I pause. I breathe. I acknowledge what I cannot control. I focus on what I can, my integrity, my effort, my response. Faith does not eliminate discomfort. It contextualizes it. Instead of interpreting every obstacle as evidence that I am failing, I consider that I may be being refined. Refinement is uncomfortable. It reshapes expectations. It challenges timelines, but it also strengthens resilience. The woman I am becoming does not operate from frantic control. She operates from grounded trust. She prepares, acts, speaks, chooses, and then she releases. There is dignity in that posture. I do not need to engineer every outcome to feel secure. And I do not need to predict every turn to feel stable. Stability can coexist with uncertainty, faith, surrender, letting go of control. They are not signs of weakness. They are acknowledgments of reality. I am responsible for my actions. I am not responsible for orchestrating the universe. And that distinction, once internalized, feels like freedom. Falling in love with the process, I used to believe the reward was the point, the promotion, the finished project, the number on the scale, the milestone birthday, the paid-off mortgage, the medal at the end of the race. I structured my motivation around arrival. I told myself that once I reached the outcome, something inside me would settle into satisfaction. There would be a moment of quiet confirmation. This was worth it. And sometimes there was a flicker of that feeling. But it never lasted. I remember training for a half marathon outside Denver a few years ago. I am not a natural runner. I do not float. I negotiate with every mile. The air was thin in the early mornings, the sky pale and wide, the pavement steady beneath my feet. I trained for months. I woke before sunrise. I tracked my pace. I adjusted my breathing. I stretched calves that protested. On race day, I crossed the finish line, slightly breathless, slightly proud. They handed me a medal that weighed only a few ounces. Within hours, the intensity of the accomplishment began to fade. but the mornings did not. The quiet rhythm of lacing my shoes, the cold air waking my lungs, the steady improvement in endurance, the subtle strengthening of my legs. That was where the transformation lived. The medal was a marker. The process was the change. Somewhere along the way, I began to understand that the process is not a bridge to the reward. It is the reward. The problem is, process rarely looks glamorous. It looks repetitive. It looks mundane. It looks like discipline, without applause. But something inside me shifts when I immerse myself in effort rather than fixating on the outcome. There is a different kind of aliveness in showing up consistently, a steadier, quieter satisfaction. Psychologically, anticipation carries a powerful charge. The brain releases dopamine not only when I receive something, but when I move toward it. The pursuit itself is activating. When I focus solely on arrival, I compress all meaning into a single moment. When I focus on process, I expand meaning across weeks, months, years. I think about learning something new at this stage of my life, in taking a piano class at 52, enrolling in a writing workshop at 46, training for strength rather than shrinking. The first sessions are awkward. My fingers stumble across keys. My sentences feel clumsy. My muscles tremble under weight. If I measure success by immediate mastery, I will quit. But if I measure success by engagement, by the willingness to remain in the learning curve, something deeper develops. Patience, humility, curiosity. Process invites me into presence. When I am too focused on results, I live slightly ahead of myself. I rush through today in pursuit of tomorrow's validation. I miss the subtle satisfaction of incremental progress. There is also a gentler truth. Arrival can feel empty if I have not cultivated presence along the way. I've reached goals in my life that once seemed monumental. And after the celebration, I have felt an unexpected quiet, a question hovering. Is this all? The answer is not to chase larger goals. It is to anchor myself in the daily engagement. When I fall in love with the process, I shift my attention from proving to becoming. I no longer ask, what will this earn me? I ask, who is this shaping me into? When I walk regularly, I am not simply maintaining health. I am reinforcing discipline. When I write consistently, I am not only producing words, I am strengthening clarity. When I have difficult conversations, I am not just resolving conflict, I am building integrity. The process becomes an identity sculptor. It also protects me from the fragile highs and lows of outcome-driven living. If I tie my emotional state exclusively to external milestones, I will oscillate wildly. Success inflates me, and failure deflates me. But when I anchor in process, my stability increases. I can experience disappointment without collapse because I know the effort itself still matters. There is a maturity in appreciating repetition, in understanding that mastery is not dramatic, it is cumulative. I think about the times I have cleaned out a room in my home, not as a quick purge, but as a deliberate decluttering, sorting through drawers, letting go of objects that no longer serve, wiping surfaces, rearranging intentionally. The visible result is satisfying, but the deeper satisfaction comes from the act itself, the sorting, the choosing, the releasing. Life functions the same way. If I want to feel more alive, I cannot wait for a grand event. I have to engage with the daily shaping. The woman I am becoming is not obsessed with speed. She is attentive to rhythm. She understands that transformation is less about intensity and more about consistency. There will be days when the process feels tedious, days when progress is invisible, days when I question whether the effort is worthwhile. That is precisely where devotion is formed, not blind devotion, not obsessive striving, but quiet commitment to the practice. Falling in love with the process means I stop postponing satisfaction. I allow myself to find meaning in preparation, in rehearsal, in repetition. I notice the improvement in my breathing when I run. I notice the increased ease in my speech when I practice directness. I notice the mental clarity that comes from limiting distraction. These are not headline achievements. They are internal upgrades. And internal upgrades sustain me longer than external applause ever could. The process stretches my patience. It refines my focus. It humbles me. It strengthens me. The outcome is a moment. The process is a life. If I want my life to feel fuller, I cannot attach fulfillment to singular events. I have to immerse myself in the becoming. And in that immersion, I rediscover something I thought I had lost. A steady, grounded sense of aliveness that does not depend on arrival. Privacy, boundaries, and power. There was a time when I believed sharing my intentions made them more real. If I said it out loud, the new routine, the personal shift, the boundary I planned to enforce, it felt solid. Speaking it gave me a temporary sense of momentum. The affirmation from others felt like progress. But over time, I began to notice something subtle and unsettling. The more I talked about what I was going to do, the less urgency I felt to actually do it. There is a psychological phenomenon where announcing a goal can trick the brain into feeling as though it has already accomplished part of it. The social validation creates a premature reward. The dopamine spike comes before the discipline, and discipline without urgency dissolves quickly. I began to see how easily I traded quiet progress for visible intention. Privacy changed that. Privacy sharpened me. When I stopped announcing my shifts, something intensified inside me. The energy that once dispersed into conversation became concentrated into action. Instead of explaining my next move, I executed it. Not out of secrecy, out of respect. There is a difference between being open and being exposed. Openness is chosen. Exposure is uncontrolled. I realized that not everyone needs access to my evolving self. Not everyone deserves insight into my vulnerabilities, my strategies, my recalibrations. Growth is delicate in its early stages. It requires protection. When I was younger, I mistook transparency for authenticity. I thought being authentic meant sharing everything, every doubt, every dream, every plan. Now I understand that authenticity can coexist with discretion. The woman I am becoming does not narrate her becoming in real time. She refines in silence. This shift was not about distrust. It was about energy management. Every time I explain myself, I expend energy. Every time I justify a boundary, I dilute its strength. Every time I seek approval for a decision I have already made internally, I fragment my resolve. Boundaries, and when they are clear, do not require elaborate defense. They require consistency. I also began to notice how conversations can subtly anchor me to older versions of myself. When people expect me to behave a certain way, to respond in familiar patterns, it is tempting to oblige. It keeps the dynamic smooth. It avoids discomfort. But if I am evolving, some dynamics will feel strained. Privacy allows evolution without constant negotiation. When I quietly adjust my schedule, my habits, my priorities, I give myself space to integrate those changes before subjecting them to external commentary. There is power in that integration. Power is often misunderstood as dominance or visibility, but at this stage of my life, power feels like coherence. My internal decisions align with my external behavior. Privacy protects coherence. There is also another dimension to this, the digital world. Social media has created an environment where constant sharing is normalized. Milestones are documented, plans are posted, reinventions are curated. It is easy to confuse visibility with progress. But some of the most profound shifts in my life have happened in silence. No announcement, no photo, no explanation, just action. I think about the times I declared a goal publicly. The rush of support felt intoxicating. But when setbacks occurred, the public nature of the commitment amplified the pressure. I was not only accountable to myself, I was accountable to an audience. That external pressure distorted the process. It made growth feel performative. When I moved privately, the only standard was alignment. And there is also wisdom in recognizing that not everyone sees my expansion as neutral. Growth disrupts equilibrium. When I change, others must recalibrate their expectations. Some will welcome it, some will resist it. If I broadcast every shift, I invite commentary from people who may not understand the context of my evolution. Privacy filters noise. It allows me to discern which voices matter. Boundaries, too, are expressions of privacy. They define where I end and another begins. In the past, I believed setting boundaries required lengthy explanations, that I owed people my reasoning in detail. Now I understand that over-explaining can weaken a boundary. When I justify excessively, I open space for negotiation. I'm not available for that. That doesn't work for me. I need time to consider. These sentences are complete. And power does not shout. It stands firm. There is loneliness in this recalibration. When I become less accessible, less predictable, some relationships shift. Familiar patterns dissolve. Not everyone adapts comfortably. That loneliness can tempt me to revert, to overshare again, to soften boundaries, to reinsert myself into dynamics that feel familiar. But familiarity is not always alignment. The woman I am becoming understands that not every relationship must have unlimited access to her inner world. She chooses intimacy deliberately. She protects her mental space. She curates who influences her thinking. This is not coldness. It is stewardship. My attention is finite. My energy is finite. My time is finite. If I distribute them indiscriminately, I dilute my capacity for meaningful growth. There is also something sacred about allowing certain transformations to unfold without commentary. When I make a change privately and let results speak, the shift feels grounded. It is anchored in lived experience, not verbal aspiration. I no longer feel compelled to prove my evolution. I embody it. Privacy has also deepened my self-trust. When I act without seeking external validation, I strengthen my internal compass. I learn to rely on my own discernment. That reliance feels stabilizing. There is less external noise to navigate, fewer opinions to filter, more space to listen inwardly. Power for me now is not about commanding attention. It is about directing it, directing my attention toward what matters, withdrawing it from what distracts, shielding it from unnecessary scrutiny. When I protect my becoming, and I honor its fragility and its strength simultaneously, there are still areas where I share openly. Vulnerability has its place, but it is intentional. It is measured. It is aligned with purpose. I do not offer my evolving self to every room. Some chapters are written quietly. Some victories are observed only by me, and there is a profound steadiness in that privacy. It reminds me that my growth is not a performance. It is a commitment. Becoming her, slowly. There is no dramatic unveiling. No cinematic moment where I wake up and suddenly feel like the woman I imagined in my notebook in Santa Monica. No thunderclap of certainty. No applause. No visible line crossed. Becoming her has been quieter than I expected. It has happened in ordinary rooms, in my kitchen before sunrise, in conference rooms where I chose not to shrink, and in long walks where I sorted through thoughts instead of distracting myself from them. In evenings when I closed my laptop earlier than usual and protected my own rest. There was no single decision that transformed me. There were hundreds of small ones. That is what I did not understand at first. I thought transformation would feel decisive, clean, obvious. I thought there would be a moment when I could say, "This is the new me." Instead, it feels layered. Some days I feel integrated, my posture steadier, my voice clearer, my choices aligned with what I know to be true. On those days, I sense the woman I am becoming moving through me naturally. I do not have to think so hard about her. She is less of an effort and more of a reflex. Other days, I revert. I hesitate. I overthink. I soften a boundary unnecessarily. I procrastinate something that matters, and for a moment I worry that I have imagined all this progress. But progress is not linear. It is iterative. The woman I am becoming does not disappear because I have an off day. She is not fragile. She is under construction. There is humility in that. I no longer expect myself to perform consistency perfectly. I expect myself to return to the question that has quietly guided me through this entire recalibration. What would the woman I am becoming do right now? Not what would impress someone, not what would avoid discomfort, not what would maintain an outdated image. What would align? Sometimes the answer is simple. She would speak clearly instead of hinting. She would sit upright instead of collapsing inward. She would take the walk even if she feels tired. She would choose the nourishing meal over the convenient one. She would end the conversation that feels draining. She would say no without apology. None of these actions are dramatic, but together they shape identity. I have noticed something subtle in this process. The more I embody her, the less I need to reference her as separate from me. In the beginning, she felt like an aspiration, a conceptual future version. I measured myself against her. I asked whether I was matching her standards. Now she feels closer, not because I have perfected anything, but because I have practiced alignment long enough that it feels familiar. The gap between who I am and who I imagined is narrowing, not through force, through repetition. There is also grief in becoming, not because I am losing something essential, but because I am releasing older versions of myself that once felt protective, the overly accommodating version, the hyper-vigilant planner, the woman who derived her worth from being indispensable. Those versions were not mistakes. They were adaptations. They helped me navigate earlier chapters, but I no longer need to inhabit them so fully. Letting them soften can feel like vulnerability. If I am not the constant caretaker, who am I? If I am not the one who anticipates everyone's needs, what is my role? Becoming her means tolerating that uncertainty. It means trusting that identity is not fixed in function. I do not have to earn my place by overextending. I do not have to secure love by shrinking. There have been moments in meetings when I felt the old reflex, to preface my idea with disclaimers, to cushion it, want to present it gently so no one feels challenged, and then I have chosen differently. I have spoken directly, calmly, without excess apology. Afterward, I did not feel euphoric. I felt steady. Steadiness is underrated. It does not spike adrenaline. It does not flood me with drama, but it signals integration. There have been dinners where I paused before ordering automatically. I considered what would genuinely nourish me rather than what would soothe me temporarily. That pause, too, is part of becoming. There have been nights when I wanted to scroll endlessly, to numb out from the day. Instead, I closed the app, I read, or I sat quietly, or I spoke honestly in prayer, not asking for outcomes but acknowledging what I felt. Becoming her is less about adding layers and more about refining alignment. And I no longer chase intensity as proof of change. I look for coherence. Do my actions reflect my stated values? Does my schedule reflect my priorities? Does my tone reflect my confidence? Does my body reflect my care? When the answer is yes more often than no, I know I am integrating. I still experience doubt. I still encounter discomfort. I still face days when everything feels heavier than usual. But I do not interpret those days as failure anymore. They are part of the rhythm. Becoming her slowly has taught me patience with myself. It has taught me that identity is shaped in mundane moments more than in grand gestures. The woman I am becoming does not demand perfection from me. She demands presence. She asks me to pay attention, to choose deliberately, to return when I drift. There is power in that return. Because returning is a decision. It means I am aware enough to notice misalignment and courageous enough to adjust. I used to think that change required urgency, that if I did not transform quickly, I was wasting time. Now I understand that sustainable change often moves quietly. It builds beneath the surface before it becomes visible. I am not in a race against my past. I am in conversation with it. Each day I negotiate small upgrades, not for applause, not for proof, but for alignment. And when I look back at the woman who once felt paused, who felt flat in the middle of a well-built life, I feel compassion for her. She was not broken. She was in transition. So am I. But now transition feels intentional. I am not waiting for a future version of myself to arrive. I am assembling her, slowly, through daily choices. And in that assembly, I'm beginning to recognize something steady and grounded, not perfection, integration. When I look back at the woman at the beginning of this story, I don't see someone dramatic or broken. I see someone competent, reliable, intelligent, a woman who built a life carefully, brick by brick, and then quietly found herself standing inside it, wondering why it felt smaller than her spirit. Nothing was collapsing. Nothing was on fire. From the outside, everything looked stable. That was the problem. Stability can disguise stagnation. Functioning can disguise drifting. I had mastered being fine. Fine at work, fine in relationships, fine in conversations, fine in responsibilities. But beneath that fine was a subtle erosion, not of success, but of aliveness. I wasn't in crisis. I was in the middle, on a plateau of predictability, where nothing hurt sharply. But nothing stirred deeply either. The most dangerous lie I almost believed was that this was maturity, that growth was for younger women, that reinvention belonged to my 20s and early 30s, that at this stage I was supposed to settle into acceptance and call it wisdom. But something inside me refused to go quiet. I realized that self-acceptance without evolution becomes self-abandonment, that waiting for someone else to awaken me was a fantasy, that no relationship, no title, no achievement could restore a spark I had slowly neglected. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was a mirror moment, not about my appearance, but about my participation in my own stagnation. I had chosen comfort, I had chosen predictability, and I had chosen to soften myself to avoid disruption. That realization hurt, but it also returned power to me. From there, everything shifted from passive to intentional. Instead of asking, why do I feel this way, I began asking, who am I becoming? That question changed everything. I stopped waiting for belief before behavior. I acted before I felt ready. I practiced the posture, the tone, the boundaries of the woman I wanted to become, not perfectly, not dramatically, but consistently. I learned that discipline is not harshness, it is devotion to alignment. I learned that accountability is not punishment, it is clarity. I learned that faith is not control, it is surrender. I learned that the process, the repetition, the quiet effort, the daily choosing is more transformative than any singular outcome. So I stopped announcing my intentions prematurely. I protected my evolution. I understood that not everyone needs access to my becoming, that privacy can be power, that boundaries can be compassion for myself and for others. And slowly, the gap between who I was and who I imagined began to narrow. There was no sudden transformation, no dramatic unveiling. There was integration, small decisions layered over time, standing straighter, speaking clearly, saying no, moving my body, guarding my mornings, trusting redirection. The woman I once saw as distant began to feel familiar, not because I forced her into existence, but because I practiced her into embodiment. The deeper lesson in all of this is not about productivity or achievement. It is about agency. At this stage of life, especially for women who have carried careers, families, relationships, responsibilities, it is easy to confuse steadiness with fulfillment. It is easy to normalize emotional flatness. It is easy to believe that if nothing is wrong, nothing needs to change. But drifting is subtle, and subtle drift over years becomes quiet regret. The lesson is this: I am not fixed. I am not finished. I am not required to remain who I was just because it once worked. Growth is not reserved for youth. Reinvention is not reckless. Discipline is not punishment. Surrender is not weakness. If I feel restless, that restlessness is not a flaw. It is feedback. If I feel underexpressed, that feeling is not ingratitude. It is a signal that something inside me wants air. How does this apply to life right now? Not hypothetically, but practically. And it begins with one honest question. What would the most aligned version of me do today? Not in 5 years, not after everything settles down. Today. Would she protect the first 20 minutes of her morning? Would she speak the sentence she's been rehearsing internally? Would she decline what drains her? Would she take a walk instead of numbing out? Would she ask for guidance instead of controlling every outcome? The application is not grand, it is daily. Alignment is built through repetition. Identity follows behavior. Belief follows evidence. And perhaps most importantly, I stop labeling myself as broken simply because I feel restless. Restlessness is often the beginning of evolution. If this story resonates with you, I want to ask you something simple. Right now, when are you more likely to be A, waiting for life to shift before you shift, or B, quietly ready to shift even if life looks fine? Comment A or B below. I truly want to see where you are, and if you feel comfortable, tell me why. What part of this journey feels most familiar to you? Where are you resisting change? Where are you already stepping into it? Your reflections might help another woman reading the comments realize she's not alone. If this conversation felt honest to you, not loud, not dramatic, but steady and real, subscribe to this channel, support it, stay here, because we are not chasing hype. We are choosing alignment. You're not broken. You're just in the middle.